Welcome to the Tria Prima podcast, a podcast about the Western esoteric tradition and Freemasonry in general. We're here with both Ike Baker and Sky Mathis. This is the Tria Philosophica Arcanum group. We've been looking forward to this for like many months now. This has been planned out. We've been quiet about it. But we're all in the same room together, because this is how we like to do it. So welcome. Thanks for coming. Thanks for coming to Phoenix, Ike.
Yeah, it's this is the first time that we've all been in a room together. So I think this is a pretty special moment, and thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you for putting me up. Thank you for having me speak at the lodge last night. That was incredible.
We had a good time.
Thank you for coming to North Carolina last weekend.
Thank you for having me. It was glorious, and I wish I could live there.
So we got Pat shooting some film in the back, but he might jump in here or there, but we figured 4 mics is enough for this one. We got Jaime. What do you have to say?
Very excited for this conversation. I think we're talking about Daimons and is that right?
Yeah.
Or, the Demiurge. I know Pat had a request because Ike, in his presentation last night at our Blue Lodge, Ascension number 89 in Phoenix, brought up the Demiurge, and then Pat and Ike were talking afterward, and I believe that was one of we didn't plan a subject.
No,
we just started recording.
Pat said, "What the hell is the Demiurge?"
And
everyone
I said,
else,
"Weren't you awake during my presentation?"
Yeah. So Sky, take it away. What the hell is it? No, I'm just kidding. But so where do we start with this sort of thing? So like Jaime said, you gave this great presentation on the Platonic tradition as it relates to Freemasonry. I had heard you mention eudaimonia, and of course a daimon is baked into that word. So that might be a great sort of jumping off place, because we were talking, I guess, generally about well-being or goodness, but how might that relate? Why is daimon like baked right into the center of the word eudaimonia?
Yeah. Well, I think it has something to do with the fact that the path of arete, which leads to eudaimonia, right? Excellence or virtue and well-being. In the Platonic conception, kind of points to this idea of coming into the highest aspect of your being as an individual human. It's at least in the earlier Platonic tradition. You know, that was the path to, I guess, the perfection of an individuality as a human. But we kind of see from Plato's letters, particularly the ones that are, I guess, academically deemed to be authentic, that he does later on. He doubts that whole thing that he initially posited. He at a certain point later down the road, he's like, it's not possible here in the material the same way it is, you know, and on the other side,
in the ethereal,
ideal. So at first he starts out this really kind of I don't want to say naive, but optimistic idea that if you follow the path of virtue, you will become, you know, subsumed, or you will embody the perfection that is like your ideal. Right? If we're talking about Platonic ideal, the ideal of Jake will be fully realized. But then later on, he's like he comes to really express some doubt that that's actually fully possible here.
Well, I know that Aristotle brings up eudaimonia again. In fact, I can't think of it exactly where in Plato, but I know that's a big deal for Aristotle. So what do you think? He just picked that up from Plato and then developed it further, because he had that was like central to his, happiness and personal fulfillment, etc.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, he would have had to, just being his student, and that being a major part of the Platonic dialogues. But the interesting thing about Aristotle is that he was kind of a prodigy within the Platonic tradition. but he kind of does his own interpretations of things. I'm not as well versed with the Aristotelian stuff. You know, I've not gotten as granular with that as I have with because I mean, to even get granular with the Platonic stuff is probably going to take like the rest of my life.
Sure.
But the Aristotelian stuff, from the way that you're kind of describing the way it fits into his whole ethos, is very much in line, right? Like that quote from that I gave last night that Plato wrote, goodness has a salvific effect upon the human soul. So that's basically, you know, the eudaimonia was basically the anamnesis, the remembering. And it's interesting because the root of the word daimon has to do with like this dipartite nature, like almost like two distinct part, right? Like I want to say, I would say like cutting in half is the root of that. There's lots of different ways you could interpret it, but the word itself seems to imply,
Dual
I guess the way
nature or
it's
something?
used, yeah, kind of, which is interesting because even the daimones have a dual nature. There's the agatho daimon and the kako daimon, but I think later in the Platonic tradition, Proclus kind of retrospectively looks back and answers the question somewhat definitively that, you know, the daimon can be, or not can be, but is in fact both exterior and interior simultaneously.
It's its own entity and that sort of thing. So is the daimon, if it is, at least in part, its own entity, is it something we can develop a relationship with? And is that sort of the point of approaching whatever eudaimonia is on a personal level? Because it seems to be a personal thing, or relating to the individual or the self. I mean, is this daimon a contactable entity? Is it something that we create a relationship with? Is it intuition?
I'll tell you what I think, and then I'd like to hear from you guys, you know. But like Proclus says, it's both interior and exterior at the same time, and you get that it's sort of conflated with the holy guardian angel and in the Golden Dawn tradition,
Higher genius.
the higher genius.
And the perfect nature in the Pikachu.
That's exactly right. And the thing about it is actually we get the term higher genius because when Thomas Taylor translated the Neoplatonic stuff, he used the word genius to translate daimon. So that's a direct correlation there. And I would say that there are two paths, right? There's one of like bhakti, devotion, and that's the exteriorization of the genius or the daimon. And then there's more of that interior sort of mystical contemplative path that recognizes the daimon to one degree or another to be an aspect of your spiritual architecture that is bornless, right?
Yeah.
It does not.
It's eternal.
Right. It's not your personality, but somehow it's a part of you.
It's sharing in your...
What do you think, Jamie?
Well, if we go to the Republic, right, isn't that kind of the first place where the first major exposition on the daimon, I think, where he says that, you are allotted, or you choose a daimon before coming into manifestation or
Incarnation.
Before you're enmattered.
So you stand outside of the cosmos. So I think of it kind of astrologically, right? That's kind of my perspective. The human soul, pre-incarnate human soul, is outside of the fixed stars in the zodiac, like how we hear it described in Macrobius, his commentary on the Dream of Scipio, etc., and of course in the Republic. So the soul is outside of the fixed stars in the zodiac, so therefore outside of causality. It is not subject to that type of causation. And then the soul chooses its daimon, and then that daimon is its mystagogue and psychopomp, who takes it down who accompanies the soul through those celestial gates down into the underworld. So
Yeah, and I think it's so at the the end of the myth of they kind of just shoot off like these like shooting stars, I think the way he describes it. But Porphyry, right? I think we were talking about this the other night on What Is Up to Us. Right. You reminded me of the title of that. He kind of develops the actual relationship on the way down that the daimon has, which is pretty interesting, you know, and putting on the soul putting on the astral garments as it descends through the heavenly spheres.
That's beautiful. I would like to get maybe Ike to elaborate and then hear your guys' thoughts on this idea of like the tetragrammaton versus the pentagrammatron and Yod-He Vav-He or Yahweh associated with the Demiurge and the insertion of the Shin as the Christ principle.
So you want me to talk about that?
Yeah, so we're moving into Demiurge. Well,
it's interesting because they're related.
Yeah, so that's what I was just going to ask. So this, well, you had mentioned, just to back up a second, Jamie, you had mentioned a mystagogue or a psychopomp, but for the listeners, I think those are sort of key terms. Just to quickly unpack that a little bit, what do we mean by that?
Mystagogue is the expounder of mysteries, right? The expounder of the mysteries of that particular descent. In this case, let's say the planetary mysteries, as the soul is accompanied down through each of the spheres, from Saturn to Jupiter to Mars to the Sun, etc., down to the sublunary sphere. And then the psychopomp, same thing, much like, you know, we consider Hermes or Anubis as a psychopomp, which is a guide of the soul. You could probably break it down: psyche, soul, pompos, maybe.
Yes.
So psychopompos is the guide of the soul, particularly into the underworld. So the underworld would be this down through the planet, you know, into the terrestrial.
We're in the underworld.
In the underworld.
Yeah. So,
and that's interesting, actually, the mystagogue idea, because when you go through a ritual, it's, you know, the it's almost like the daimon is the hierophant of the soul. It's initiating it into incarnation, into materiality. That's an interesting concept.
So, if the daimon sort of shares in that, like pinballing down the celestial spheres, and it's related to each individual man, of course, the demiurge is related to archetypal man or the atom, right? Weren't several of the quote unquote Gnostic sects under the understanding that the demiurge was in fact the one that created the first man and sort of shares in the quality of man in general? So there seems to be some sort of sympathy there, that if our daimon is related to us as an individual, there's this demiurgic principle or entity that is related to man generally in some sort of interesting way. So I think that's sort of an interesting lead-in to your conversation about the demiurge, because that's definitely the other thing that we had on our mind is there's this...
Always.
Yeah, right. This greater concept of a creator deity or creator being in general. A craftsman,
right.
A divine craftsman.
Yeah, that's what that word means.
That is related to man generally. So there's like this individual hierophant and this general sort of creator god.
That's what word means?
The demiurge.
Demiurgos means craftsman.
Okay.
Yeah.
The thing is, in several of the Gnostic cosmologies, the demiurge employs lesser beings like angels and even daimons to construct man, and it's really interesting because when man begins to speak on his own, like, they freak out and they try and kill him. It's pretty wild.
Well, yeah. Didn't the demiurge create? What wasn't Adam? like a dead matter at first, like an unspirited or
Adam, I think, means red earth. So it's just talking about like dirt, like materiality, clay.
And then this sort of
like
spirit.
Edom. Edom, I think, is earth or red, or it's red.
Yeah.
They call it red.
Okay.
Edom. But I guess I don't know. The Gnostic stuff is interesting. Also, there's something in the canonical Hebrew text. It's also like it says Yod He Vav He, or Yahweh Elohim, or the Elohim. Said. So that word is plural, right? Because it's Eloah is the singular form of that, and Elohim is plurality. So that in and of itself, and even the Genesis account is saying like there a plurality of beings said, let's create man. So but the demiurge is essentially what creates those things, and the superstructure behind. I would say that it's the space in which all those things can inhabit and sort of eventually build the material universe.
Can I ask can you elaborate on the pleroma in relation to that?
Yeah, I mean, you want to take this one, Jamie?
I don't know a lot of Gnostic stuff. I know that's like, isn't that, it's not necessarily a cosmological thing, right? Isn't it sort of like the totality of something, the pleroma?
Yeah, it's essentially, so it's in Gnostic verbiage, it gets kind of used to discuss where the eons exist and how Sophia it becomes a fallen eon. She descends from the pleroma. So essentially, you have in the Platinian of Plotinus, you have his cosmogony and cosmology when the intellect, the divine nous, begins to create. All of its creations are spiritual. None of them are physical. That's the pleroma. Pleroma means fullness in Greek. It means like whole. And so it creates that. And then what happens is spiritual beings decide to mimic, right? You see that a lot in even like Hermetic literature and like these mythic images of God looking into the face and seeing his, into the water.
Hovering over the firmament.
Exactly.
Over the waters, darkness upon the face of the deep.
Yeah. I've seen and heard it described as an egg, like a pre-cracked
cosmic egg.
Right.
Like an Orphic egg.
Yeah. Right.
That's the pleroma?
The cracking of that and the yolk and everything making its way out of that is Sophia sort of making her way.
You want to make an omelet, you got to break a few eggs.
Out of the pleroma. Yeah.
Now, what's the interchange or the sort of growth of Yaldabaoth and Yod He Vav He? Like there is some sort. Does one become the other? Are they two separate entities? Or
well, that's important because it's probably true, right, Ike, that the demiurge, the idea of the demiurge, and daimones this is pre-Christian. These are ancient Greek ideas.
Well, they really get fleshed out, I would say, what's the word I'm looking for? Contemporaneously, like at the same time.
Yeah.
It's contemporaneous with Hellenized Judaism and early Christianities. Mm-hmm. So I like Plato talks about. He does not flesh it out to this degree. Right. He's focused on other things.
So it isn't until the early Christians. First couple centuries of the Common Era where
the Jewish diaspora in Alexandria, along with the Hermetists and the Neoplatonists and the Gnostics, they were all kind of in that milieu.
Yeah,
so when it became
Gnostics aren't, believe it or not, there is a tremendous amount of evidence to suggest that Gnostics are not exclusive to early Christianity. They're a huge part of it, but really so over the course of two massive conferences, a group of scholars, I think it's like international scholars, and it took like 20 years for them to confer on this, but they kind of affirmatively said the evidence suggests almost beyond a doubt that there is a group of pre-Christian Platonic philosophers that refer to themselves as Gnostikoi.
Oh, really?
Gnostics, yeah.
Interesting. So let's circle back to something you asked about Yahweh and Yeshua being the descended Sheen.
The,
So ask
the
that again.
insertion of the shin,
Yeah.
which is kind of correspondent to the Christos, the Christ energy being descended down into the Demiurge. Would that be the wrong way to describe it, or into?
Well, the Demiurge is conflated
materiality.
with Yahweh by some Gnostics, right?
Yeah.
The Old Testament God.
Almost by all, I would say by all, like so aside from, because we have large groups of Gnostics. I'm sure there were just as many sects within Gnosticism as there were within Christianity in general.
Right.
But I would say that almost unanimously they said that the God of the Old Testament is
the Demiurge.
Definitively the Demiurge. Yeah.
Isn't it more like during Jakob Böhme and Kircher and these sort of German theosophists of the early Renaissance, maybe, where you start to get the descent of Sheen into the Tetragrammaton, and then you get this Pentagrammaton. I don't know if that occurs any earlier than Böhme. That's not an antique idea.
It's actually the first place that occurs. I think into the actual Pentagrammaton as indicative of
Kircher sounds right.
Reuchlin.
Oh, really?
De Verbo Mirifico,
Yeah,
the wonder-working
it is in
word.
there.
Yeah, so
That's the first place?
I believe so. Here's the thing. I'm not as familiar with Böhme's stuff. I would love to delve into that stuff more deeply. But in my research of like the Kabbalistic,
It's definitely in Reuchlin.
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
I've seen it there.
Yeah. And so, but what it is it's their way of, right, because at that time you have the Prisca Theologia, the ancient philosophy or theology really going around, Pico, Ficino, all those, Kircher as well. And you start to see that being...
It's in Agrippa as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, all those guys, he leaned on heavily, yeah.
Yeah, Reuchlin particularly for his Kabbalah.
Yeah, and Ficino as well. You know, the 3 books of Ficino, but which I saw in hardcover today. At that.
Oh,
at that
really? At the
bookstore.
book gallery?
It blew my mind. It was the first book
Oh,
I
no
saw.
way. I got to go over there.
It's like
Before
$65 though.
someone snags
Where,
that.
Book gallery?
Yeah.
Oh, you were over there.
Yeah,
So-
it was great.
So what's the meaning here, right? If we're, we can analyze where it happened in history, but what are we talking about when we're talking about?
There's one thing that I wanted
Sheen.
to bring up.
I'm talking about very poorly constructed Hebrew.
There was something you mentioned to me, Ike, about this Christ event as even making the Demiurge repent.
That's in Basilidian Gnosticism.
And I thought that was interesting too. And maybe
So the thing is, like, people get it twisted. There's the middle Platonists who started saying, like I told you last night, you know, they look around because Plato conceived of the Demiurge as completely good because it was using the forms of the divine mind and the of the
Those were his working tools.
Toan, really, the good, capital G good. He was like saying, okay, these forms pre-exist the Demiurge, the ideals pre-exist the Demiurge, and that's what he takes and kind of uses as this like scaffolding, this structural material on which he hangs the skin of materiality. But the problem is that the skin of materiality is subject to death and decay, and the bones are not. So imperfection and perfection. And imperfection didn't have the same connotation that it has to us. All they meant was like, okay, philosophically, how do we determine reality? How do we determine perfection? And all it is just changeless and deathless. And what that means is eternal.
Right.
Because you have, if something's changeless, there can be no time.
Right.
Time is really a measurement of change.
Yeah, and those are like our maker's mark that we're looking for.
Exactly.
Those like hints of eternality that manifest themselves
Right. They're
amongst
universals.
material.
They're called universals, and the realm of form or ideals was Plato's response to that problem.
Yeah. Well, wait, that's kind of interesting. If we think about, because Hebrew, just like Greek, is a numerical system, of course.
Isopsophy.
Yeah,
Gematria.
and thereby are also universals, right? Wouldn't the Hebrew alphabet be each sort of these universal or eternal sort of puzzle pieces, or maybe not puzzle pieces, because that implies that they could only take one's form, but
they're the Hebrew version of I guess like the building blocks of reality. They're
Right.
Like an archetypal symbol of sorts.
Like sacred algebra.
yeah.
And in that you're really approaching this idea of forms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if
It's in the Sefer Yetzirah.
Yeah.
so, with that in mind, back to Sheen. So Sheen specifically, as a
mother letter.
mother
Fire.
letter and a part of that scheme that we just sort of talked about, Sheen specifically is what are its significations?
It's a triple
Sheen.
fire.
Okay.
It's a triple fire. It's
Now, is
spiritual
that,
fire.
I understand it like that as well, but I know it from GD.
Same.
So what is it outside of that context?
Well, I have. I mean, in
Is it
terms
just
of
tooth?
strict. Well, yes, I would say if you're just talking about what is it, each. Well, to back up, I'm pretty sure people who are familiar with this podcast are going to understand the ideas of the associations with the Hebrew letters.
Sure.
Right? Each one has not only a phonetic sound, a numerical value, but they have
meaning.
an idea. Yeah, a meaning. And so tooth is the traditional, I guess, Hebrew idea or meaning associated to it. But typically, I think really in Christian Kabbalism, Shin really becomes that spiritual fire.
With the Germans.
Yes.
Yeah, German theosophy.
Yeah.
When you say triple fire, I don't really know what you're talking about. What
The letter itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also the threefold fire, which they consider. So there's this idea that if we're gonna talk about, and it gets really hairy because you've got all these kind of appropriated and mashed up kind of words like spirit, soul.
Yeah, especially by that time.
Right. So, but the thing is, this idea of fire being the primary vehicle of it's the most analogous to and contains. It's arguably the best container in physicality. Now we're talking about Renaissance ideas here, so we're constantly toggling, but for spirit, which is really to say the divine mind is active through fire in the physical. That's a later kind of idea, and that gets elaborated in Agrippa, right? He says if you're gonna do any kind of ritual, you must have a candle. Fire has to preside over the entire operation.
Well, we could segue into a lot of. I know you kind of focus on alchemy, Sky, and at this point, there's a lot of alchemical kind of meaning, behind fire, behind salamanders, behind that set of Paracelsian correspondences, and all manner of alchemical sort of.
Yeah, but before we do, I wanted to see if we could keep dialing in on more of the meaning aspect of this dissension of this Christ principle and what that means for humanity or our souls or the whole grand scheme of things.
Yeah. Since you're revving me up, I'm going to throw it back on you. So yeah, you guys being familiar with the GD, right? I mean, you'll understand. You already know this stuff, but for anybody who's listening, essentially you have at the gates of the Garden of Eden are placed the four cherubim, and they're essentially the living powers of the four-lettered name, and that's what they represent in terms of this again mythic, narrative. We're not necessarily talking about anything literal here, but it's and that four-lettered name obviously corresponds to the Demiurge in this particular conception. But to just preface, like you had one of you guys had mentioned about the Demiurge repenting when it realized that the Christ had come. Not all Gnostic sects, in fact, very few of them comparatively of the large ones, believe the Demiurge to be willfully malevolent. Typically, it was just ignorant of what is beyond it. And so therefore, it's a very fitting representation of our own personal egos. It's like, I think I'm doing this. And that's the thing in this emanative cosmology. The Demiurge is so far away from the divine, so to speak, that it just thinks, I am doing this. And so essentially, within this particular thing, you have the four-lettered name, which gives us the elements. So materiality, material reality. And then the descent of Shin is the spirit beyond that comes and literally rends the veil of materiality right in the middle, clearing the middle path, which is the path of ascent or the path of return directly between the two. And that renders the name Yeshua, which is essentially the Basilidians also did not celebrate the incarnation of the Christ around the winter solstice. They celebrated it in the spring around the time, like within 3 days of when we typically believe Jesus going to be baptized by John the Baptist, because it's that point when he humbles himself and said, like, right, if I'm the guy, I should be able to do it myself, right? No, but you have to do it. And he is baptized, and that's when the Spirit descends into him as a dove. The skies part, and God says, "Behold, this is my Son, in whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." It's from that point on that the Christ is here with us.
Okay, so like bringing that down all the way to the personal narrative, that's like the epiphany. That's moving away from the state of I'm doing this, and now
that's
a realization or remembrance of what is actually in the literal sense of remembering. Go ahead.
So I think from what I've gathered about this subject, like talking about it mostly with you, Ike, is that I find fascinating is this idea, primarily within like esoteric Christianity, is that that's what's available to all of us. It's not exclusive to Jesus. And that's the message, is that this connection with the divine that is depicted in this understanding is what is to be taught and given to everybody to recognize that that's what's available.
It's not monopolized by...
Is that accurate?
I mean, yeah. I think so. I think the thing is that it was already taught. It was already given to everybody. That's what the Gospels are.
Maybe that has something to do with the connection with your daimon, and as a sort of bridging that connection.
I mean, what do you think about ideas like that, Jay? I've kind of like been pretty long-winded about stuff like that, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that stuff.
Well, I mean, going back to just like you were just talking about the pentagram, and in like your typical pentagram ritual in the GD, right? There are elemental points on the pentagram corresponding to the letters of the tetragrammaton as well, right? You have earth, air, water, and fire. And that top point on the pentagram is usually depicted with the wheel of spirit, right? And the others are the cherubim, the signs of the fixed signs of the zodiac corresponding to each of those elemental triplicities. And when the spirit comes down and sort of inhabits that, I think, if I understand what you're getting at, I think that's that could be seen as this sort of Christ consciousness thing that descends into man, descends into matter, just as macrocosmically the fire comes down into the sublunary sphere of the elements. The spirit, descends through Tiferet, let's say, into Malkut, and just, microcosmically, that happens in man because man is the little universe, so it would be a mirror of that, and that would be, or you know, a little hermetic kind of fractal of that, and that would be what some people, I guess, call Christ consciousness. Now, I know that sounds fruity and new agey, I think, to say Christ consciousness, but I think it only sounds fruity from our perspective today.
Right.
But that's not something that's like uncommon in spirit, you know.
Yeah.
Sky, in asking that question, well, especially because Ike said I'm going to throw it back at you, and I just want to make sure that happens.
Yeah, what do you mean?
Because you're usually the interviewer, and I want to turn this back inwards at you. Do you think that there was like a moment like that for you, like some sort of dissension of spirit for you? I'm interested about your story because that. Well, it's a pointed question. It's like specific.
You definitely focus on that stuff, which is great. But yeah, so
I want to know about that moment.
Moment or moments?
Or moment. Yeah, that's a good good throwback. But
let me think about this for a second. If I'm thinking about if we're going to define it as, are we opening oneself up to a higher power that we're allowing to act through and guide our soul trajectory? If that is that kind of how we're speaking about it, is that what you're asking about those moments? Or?
Sure, yeah. I mean,
that's kind of how I'm thinking about it.
Well, what have you personally experienced where like you think that is right? Because in order for us to be drawn to explore ideas, I think there's like we're detecting an element of truth. So what in your personal experience draws you to that idea?
So I would say the first attempt at something like that was in church, where there was this, and I was probably, I don't know, 12 or 13 or something along those lines, and they said, if you want to give yourself to Christ, come up to the front of the church and, like, I don't know, do some prayer over you or something along those lines. And I was like, okay, this is I believe in this. What I've heard, confusingly though, I will say, like, a lot of all of this was very confusing in terms of how I was introduced to Christian concepts and through the church and the institutionalized nature of things.
It can feel like it's like defying rationality.
Nonetheless, it was like, okay, this is a good thing to me. Like, this is good. It represents higher. It represents something that is good and bettering.
When you subject it to all the theory and the rationalization and stuff like that, of course it's going to be, you know, when we talk about this stuff historically, theoretically, and, you know, technically like that, that's not the same as the praxis of being ensouled or inspirited or inspired.
But then if I think about it more too, I almost feel like there's always been that, and maybe it was because I grew up within a religious context, so I always had this feeling that I did have a connection by default with the divine, I guess, or like God or a higher power. But then, you know, just trying to do the right thing or do what I felt like was a, you know, good way to go. There was that.
Maybe that was your daimon.
But then ultimately it came into the whole, at least the institutionalized version of Christianity that this was, in questioning things that I didn't understand, or the idea of being saved was very confusing for me, or the idea of things where it was said, like, Jesus died for your sins, but then or in accepting him into your heart, and what does that mean? Like things along these lines were very confusing, and
seems like
there was
you
no
knew there was like
denial.
a deeper level to that.
I didn't really
claims.
Yeah, well, for sure. But so then if I would have conversations or ask questions, the answers that I got weren't fulfilling to me, and the people around me told me that the way I was thinking about things were not Christian, kind of devalidating the connection that I felt like I already had in some ways. So that kind of really drove me to try to unravel a lot of understandings about all different kinds of spiritual traditions and connections with God and what that means and the debates about it, different philosophies.
Which is what you're still
exactly
in the middle of.
And I think it's because I have a really hard time with the confusion aspects that seem to be like put on to especially young children just because of my own experience, and then almost like guilt tripping or gaslighting people into subscribing to your fundamentalism. And that's not to devalue or disrespect anybody else's connection that they have that may be true for them in the ways that they go about connecting with God or the divine. Mm-hmm. But it's the certainty that they say things with, and or the attitude that they have, and the way that they can. That when I'm saying they, not every, it's just groups, individual groups of people that I'm speaking from my own experience that have kind of had a hurtful like it upset, like it hurt me to kind of devalue my own personal experiences and like things along these lines, and saying like, well, if you don't do this, if you don't accept this way, then you're going to go to hell eternally and burn forever. And I'm like, well,
I agree. No, I'm kidding.
Like that doesn't.
Well, that just didn't make that violated your intuition about it. It seems like that would violate probably any of our intuitions. Well, and to your point, it seems like it's a process, which is like your immediate response to my question was that it wasn't one epiphanous moment. It's like these
that was just that was
processes.
the first one I would say. I guess.
Yeah,
that
I mean that's initiation.
Yeah,
it's just it happens in stages over and over and over until you and you're just kind of going on this. You're in life. I think you're always moving on an arc, right? Because I don't think that you're ever really still in materiality. You're either moving one direction or the other.
Yeah,
but
time's going.
And right. I don't know if this might not be up your guys' alley, but doing DMT, I mean, that to me was a divine experience. Like that was one of the most significant moments of my life. Like I experienced gnosis of something that was transcendent, and
for sure, something like that.
So I know that, like, for that, if I was to express that to people in my family, that would to them be viewed as, they would maybe even view that as like demonic or evil or
daimonic, maybe.
Yeah, there you go. Interesting.
And so it's just this seeking to help. What I'm attempting to do or be a part of is bridging gaps and facilitating deeper understandings that within these things like the occult for your average traditional Christian, even the word itself, if they hear anything associated with it, they have a negative view of it and want to just remove themselves from it. They'll try to deter you from exploring the subject matters because of maybe what they've heard about it or things being demonized about just stuff like this, and it just drives me crazy.
Well, that's what you and I were talking about, like when you were hanging out at my place this weekend. And I was kind of like, the occultism has gotten like typecast as Satanism for so long. It's like it needs like another role.
Yeah,
like it needs to clean the palate.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting about a DMT experience is that there does seem to be a level of objectivity to it. Like a lot of people who have these experiences report the same thing, not similar things, but oftentimes the exact same things. Yeah. But what's also interesting about any sort of psychedelic experiences is that they tend to highlight the virtues and vices that are unique to the individual.
Absolutely.
Right? In this sort of abstract way where you're experiencing them on their abstract terms, like not in your specific sort of individual moments where a certain virtue or vice might have played out in some scenario in your life, but it's like you have these psychedelic experiences, and although many people who have had psychedelic experiences meet the same entities or see the same fractaline building or that sort of thing, but at the same time, there's a individuality to the experience in that the virtues and vices that we carry, which are specific to each of our, our souls or our natal charts, to be literal, are sort of brought to the surface, and we get to experience them on this abstract, like objective sort of plane. So I think that's a great example of a moment where you have that sort of that spirit or that dissension of the spirit, or maybe we're ascending to something,
Right. Well, that's the whole idea. Like Jaime was saying earlier, like Tefereth is kind of the maybe a middle chamber where we reach up and the up reaches down, and that's why there's this kind of bridal chamber thing happening in Tefereth, right? And you said receive Christ into your heart, right? And that's to Jamie's point, like the whole rationalization and hyper intellectualizing of these ideas is not going to get it into your heart. It's almost like this dome over your heart where it's like it's just being like sort of deflected.
And I would say, like, at the time, like receiving Christ into your heart, it's like, I think it's important to get to the ideas of what Christ represents. So it's like, what are you receiving into your heart? Because it seems like a lot of the times it's easy for people to say that you should accept Christ into your heart without describing what that means.
Well, the thing is, I think a lot of times that it's, I think personally, right? I mean, this is not a definitive statement, but for me personally, in my own
this is going on the record.
Look, just don't come knocking on my door because I don't have shit for you. I think, you could say that the heart, maybe, if you want to put it poetically, is a place where we feel things. And people feel fear. They feel it acutely. And I think that people who let quote unquote Christ into your heart because of fear, I think that's. I don't think that was the message that Christ was trying to inculcate.
That's a huge point.
I personally, to be 100% honest with you, I've studied Gnosticism, I've studied Reuchlin, I've studied all this kind of stuff. And to me, like, the only thing that I need to keep coming back, and this is me, the only thing I need to keep going back to are the Gospels, the 4 canonical Gospels. There's nothing in there that contradicts the message of Christ to me. Paul, the letters of Paul, sure, maybe, even though they're some of my favorite Christian writings, because he was like the Flava Flav of Christianity. He was such an excellent hype man. Mm-hmm. And he had a very Gnostic bent to him. He really did. And then you get all the thou shalt not and don't do this. That's Old Testament shit. That's why Christ he began what he said, you have heard it said, X, Y, and Z. But verily I say unto you. And then he goes on to contradict what he just said. And he said, I come not to break, but to fulfill the law. But the word in Greek is plerosai, and that means I make the law whole, meaning you didn't have the whole law.
Plero, like pleroma.
Right, wholeness, fullness. Plerosai means I fulfill, I make whole. I make it whole. I
He
finish
put
it.
the egg back together. He put Humpty Dumpty back together,
Good point.
brother.
So, I would like to ask if you could describe separate the body or the vessel or the person or the name from Christ or Jesus, the energy or the consciousness of Christ itself. Like, what is that, and what does it inculcate?
It's this salvific principle, right?
The Sacred Heart and the Redeemer, the Restorer, the Repairer, the Paraclete, all the traditional names.
But that implies so much. So that's like, where do you even start? Because I think there's probably, again, tying it to the natal chart, there's an individual aspect to that salvific principle, because there are things specific to our nature, to our personal natures that we need, virtues and vices that we carry that are unique to us in their own proportion that we need to sort of rectify to some degree. And there's the universal aspect to that salvific principle as well, which ties both to a daimon in developing whatever that relationship is with that mediating sort of factor, but also in totality with maybe that artificer, that great artificer principle, like that is more universal. But it's so hard to like get into the
And
weeds
like,
about.
to me, so if somebody was like, do you accept restoration and rectification into your heart? Do you accept exaltation? Like, who wouldn't? Like, to me, it's like absolutely, like, of course. I think it's just the confusion of all of the context that surrounds these
And then
things.
there's also
You're like, yes, I want that.
I think
Please.
I think deep inside of that, and that's the point, right? I mean, I think inside a lot of people, there's an understanding that I could be doing better.
Yeah.
I have a question for Jaime, though. I think you guys are familiar, at least, with the things that I have said about theurgy and stuff like that. But I'm interested to hear if you find a through line of theurgy and perhaps like ritualistic, maybe early or maybe not, but Christianity. Do you find there to be like a consonance between the two, or any relation, meaningful?
Theurgy and Christianity?
Yeah, sure.
I guess what do you mean, historically? I think that you could draw a line. I don't know that story very well, but you do get a lot of Neoplatonic ideas showing up, via Pseudo-Dionysus. I think that there's one pretty plain introduction, Macrobius as well. So, and then Dante. You see it in Dante. He clearly has this stream of Scipio-like cosmology, and a lot of the same moves, a lot of the same motifs. Now, in terms of like the ethos and character, I don't know. It just gets kind of hazy, right? It gets kind of vague. But
well, personally, though, because actually I think probably all four of us identify as a Christian, but maybe also all four of us have some theurgic practice that we partake in or involve ourselves with. So for you, on a personal note, how do those two how do you reconcile the idea of having a theurgic aspect to your life and a Christian aspect? Or are they not two separate aspects?
Well, I think I tend to compartmentalize those things, although they're part of a bigger system. But you guys know that this is not the time, like, for me to be talking about that stuff. But just because personally, I mean, if we're saying personally, I'm like in a weird place right now. So it's like not like I'm not doing myself any favors talking about it.
Or maybe that's exactly the sort of thing that if you're in the middle of a sort of worldview,
crisis.
an ontological crisis or something,
Well,
then
I have to say that I'm privy to the stuff that you're going through to some degree or another. I think you're handling it very courageously for sure, and I think you're working through it. And I think it sounds to me like you're doing a fucking great job at getting through. Because if I had similar issues, I don't know. I don't know if I'd be able to still keep going. So I respect you for it, and
Yeah, it's a strange place to be.
yeah.
And I don't see it as a crisis of faith or anything. It's more of a just philosophical thing.
Yeah.
But the sort of the reverberations from that are quite like damaging to other structures, adjacent structures.
well, if it's your whole worldview,
Right.
then yeah.
So the whole thing is like, it's an unenviable place to be. And, but it is something, I mean, I feel grateful, and maybe this is that, more of a faith-based component to it. I do feel like this is happening. So, and, it will culminate in a better arrangement in time. But this is just a really strange place to be.
Yeah. From a astrological perspective, to get a little more practical with this, especially for the listener who might be interested in applying maybe some of what we're talking about, I think the astrological perspective is a good one to maybe start with, at least in terms of this conversation. So what does astrology give an individual in this quest for a better understanding of the self, their relationship with the divine? Like
The schematic of character.
yeah, where do we start?
So you have to know the date and time and location of your birth. You have to know the exact time, and if you know all that stuff, you can get somebody to generate or erect a natal chart for you, or you can go online and do it. And if you have that, am I just talking to anybody who
Yeah,
might
for
be
sure.
listening?
Yeah.
And then if you have that, you can call me up, and for $180, no, I'm kidding, but no,
Worth it.
no, you could reverse engineer your descent into incarnation, where at every planetary sphere, depending on the condition and placement of that planet, you took on vices, virtues, etc., various qualities and characteristics that when a skilled astrologer looks at a natal chart, they can sort of see this forming of a personality, and you could kind of take that apart and do remediations, mitigations. You could look at transits and things and see how those are affected. I mean, it gets very complicated, and even Ptolemy said it's a thankless, very difficult task, and he said it's super difficult, but he says a skilled astrologer can do that. So.
Yeah. Well, and thankfully we have pretty great tools to be able to handle that stuff nowadays, where they had to do a lot more manual labor, let's say, to erect that chart.
I think there's a sense of holism of the chart that comes only through great industry and practice, because to some degree there's got to be. I have seen people who have not been practicing astrology also for as long as others that have, and that's not to say that they had been practicing for a month or even a year, but perhaps less than somebody who had been doing it for 2 decades, and out of just this, I guess, intuition, this intuitive ability can kind of really see, as he's saying, past just a schematic, but seeing the forming of a person. I
Sure.
can't do that. I've been studying astrology for like probably 11 years. You know, I can't do that.
Yeah, you got to have the astrologer should have a really good intuition. And it takes someone who is fairly, in terms of the native, who is the person that is having their astrological, let's say their chart
The
read or
subject
something.
of the
Yeah, the
chart.
subject of the chart. It takes a good native too, meaning someone who is going to engage in a dialogue with the astrologer about their life, because I think that's important when you're talking about, it's like not mind reading. You need someone's biography and history to be able to really construct maybe a narrative that's viable enough to build on top of in terms of further character development or any of those sorts of things.
This brings us right back to kind of where we started this conversation, as far as the daimon, right? Because
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask next.
When I was saying looking at the chart, you can see that schematic of character, but the person begins to materialize as well. And I think that what you're seeing is the map of that daimonic journey, right? You're seeing the map of that descent through into the underworld, through the planetary spheres. And if you see that in the map of the native, in their chart, there are ways to derive the name and planetary affiliation of your daimon from the chart. And this is a very old kind of really involved technique. Everybody in Hellenistic, Perso-Arabic, and even some medieval Renaissance astrology, they all had a method by which you can calculate your daimon, right? And if you were to calculate for that entity, you could then astrotheurgically use that relationship, that daimonic intercessor, to guide you back, as a psychopomp would, back into, back through each of those spheres, beginning at the moon. In fact, if you go to the Poimandres 125. Poimandres, I think it's 125, the first book of the Corpus Hermeticum, how we generally encounter them. There is a planetary ascent there where a vice is given up at each of the spheres. It's clear as day.
Yeah.
And not only is it as clear as day, but it goes the moon. It doesn't say the moon, Mercury, Venus, but it gives you a characteristic or a signification that is clearly, any astrologer will tell you, definitely has to do with those planets in their Chaldean order ascending. So
and it's shedding. It's very poetic. You're like, shed this, and
those
now on to the
astral
next
garments,
one. You
it's
shed
on
this.
what is up to us.
Yeah, that's a cool piece to read.
fast.
It's the coolest. I love that passage because it's such a clear anagoge, or anabasis as well.
Right. So, to begin sort of summarizing and wrapping up, like, Sky.
Can I-
Yeah, go.
No, well, it might be a long question. I just want to ask one question to Jaime about a confusion with astrology that I'm still trying to reconcile or figure out. Within different systems, I know that because I talked to both you and Ike about this a little bit, but I still haven't wrapped my head around, so determining your ascendant sign from, if I'm looking at a Hellenistic approach versus
Are you saying whole sign and
sidereal,
right?
So tropical would say your sun sign is. Yeah, I mean, either system.
You mean tropical
You have your
versus
sun sign and
sidereal.
your ascendant. Well, I've noticed that if I'm looking at my chart on a tropical version, it would say that I have a different sun sign. I think I would be Scorpio on sidereal calculations, but on
Yes, the biggies are like you're in one. You're looking at a Placidus house system, and the other you're looking at a whole sign. And this is a thing that's.
Well, he's saying.
So would that change my ascendant as well? And would that change, like, if you're determining the daimonic thing, like you were speaking?
Yeah, that'd change all that stuff. So basically, yeah, sidereal and tropical. First thing you got to realize is that signs are not constellations.
Right.
You know, and if you don't view them as that doesn't, signs and constellations are two different things. So once you just forget about that connection, then things will make sense for you.
And also, just to, in terms of the whole sign, to sort of argue for a whole sign, what we have of extant, ancient natal charts are like the vast majority of them are whole sign.
Yeah, Hellenistic astrology was I think almost unanimously.
Yeah,
whole
everything
sign
we
houses.
have is whole sign.
Houses.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, I think because it's what it's really easy to do is it's really easy to go on an astrological website, calculate the natal chart for free.
Yeah,
and there's all these different really esoteric options.
Yeah,
and
where do you start?
Using tropical astrology, as he's saying, the signs are not the constellations. The signs are divisions of the ecliptic, or the apparent path of the sun in the sky. Whereas, like the constellations that these things were based on have moved right over time. So, and also the thing is, you can't divide the ecliptic equally because the constellations, some of them are very small. Right?
Yeah, they're all
Virgo,
different
tiny,
sizes.
and like Taurus is enormous.
Right.
So they're all really so. But the thing is, that's not what we're talking about. Some systems do that. Western esotericism particularly or primarily operates on tropical. The only variation I've seen there is that when you're in some traditions, when you are doing a physical ritualistic operation, you have to find the actual. You can either divvy it up symbolically and find the area of the ecliptic, or you could find the actual constellation.
Or if you're doing fixed star stuff.
Right.
So-
Or planets too. You have to have a clear line of sight
Sure.
to the planet.
Yeah. So I'd say actually the best option, well, this is my opinion, the best option for someone that doesn't have some nice software and doesn't want to pay for it is that you don't need to. You can go, AstroSeek has a traditional checkbox. You just hit a traditional button and it'll pre-populate all of the traditional settings.
Oh, that's interesting.
That will so you don't have to do any of that digging. You can literally just go to AstroSeek and hit. And I think it was probably Chris Brennan that kind of put the pressure on AstroSeek, and they were like, all right. So they preset everything. You can just go click traditional astrology now and put your birth info in, like Jaime said, and it'll spit out your traditional chart, the chart that you would probably want to be looking at if you're going to try to do some calculation that you would arrive at your daimon with, or something like that.
For beginners, though, I don't know if this is a fact, but I think the last time I went on there, because I do utilize, I lean on them heavily for that stuff. I don't think that for beginners, if you're looking for all the interpretations, the delineation of that, I'm not sure that that's included, because I know a lot of beginners. A lot of beginners of astrology are going to go to that just basic natal chart, and then they're going to just read what it says instead of trying to do it. It doesn't have that on the traditional.
No, you should. I mean, ultimately, if you're uninformed about that sort of thing, first thing you should do is
take Jaime's class.
Well, take Jaime's class or get a chart reading from Jaime. But if you don't have the money to spend, you start comparing information.
Or get a better job and take Jaime's class.
Yeah, I don't know. So. Well, gentlemen,
This has been great.
do we have any other final comments on daimons or demiurges or astrology or
I don't, but I
the
love
Christ
you guys.
consciousness?
I'm very happy to be here with you guys.
Yeah.
I really am. This is incredible. This is a great moment for me. Thank you.
Yeah, this is a lot of fun.
This is a blast. I wish we could do it all the time.
Yeah. And
I'm sorry I don't live here.
Let's say hi to Pat as well. Hey,
Pat,
Pat.
do you have any words of wisdom?
Buy some socks.
Tria Prima has brand new socks, and Pat needs
snap.
you to buy those socks. Damn it. They're checkered. Wear them to lodge if you're a Mason. Wear them to lodge if you're not a Mason. Good luck getting in, but give it a shot. Again, this is the Tria Prima podcast. You can find us at triaprima.co. Where can we find Ike Baker?
I like to be in the park.
Okay.
No, you can go to ikebaker.com, ikebaker.com. My latest video stream there, my podcast, my blog is up there, and anything else you need to know about me.
Yeah, ton of good stuff. Where can we find Sky?
The best. You can find Sky at Philosophical Minds Podcast, YouTube, Instagram, all of that stuff. The RSS feed. Also check out the Aetherica podcast.
Oh yeah, you
That
guys have a
is
project together.
Collab.
We do.
With
The
Ike and I,
Aetherica.
which is really dope. We're on, I think, like 15th episode currently.
Yeah, hours. I mean, like hours of rolling content there.
All right, we'll check that out. And then JamiePaulLamb.com, presumably, right? And I don't have my own website. I'm triaprima.co.
You need to get one.
Come back to triaprima.co. Thanks for listening. We appreciate you for making the trek out here from North Carolina. Appreciate you making the trek from the East Valley.
All the way from
This was a
Mesa.
blast, and hopefully we can do it again soon. Pat, you look great over there. All right, bye everyone.
Love you all.
Bye.
Farewell.